Hey, it's Art from My New Microphone, and in this video, I want to help you breathe life into your musical productions and improve the separation in your mixes with the technique of sidechain compression. Now, sidechain compression is when we take an external sidechain signal, another audio track, for example, and use it to control a compressor that is acting to compress another track. In other words, with sidechain compression, we are using one track to control the gain reduction of another track. Before we get into it, I should make it clear that every compressor has a sidechain path that effectively takes an audio signal, converts it to a control voltage, and then uses that CV to control the gain reduction circuit. Normally, this sidechain signal is taken from the input or program signal that is feeding the compressor, either before or after the gain reduction circuit, depending on if it's a feed forward or feedback circuit. But the technique effectively known as sidechain compression actually takes an external sidechain signal to act on the gain reduction circuit of the compressor, rather than the typical input signal. Sidechain compression is often used in mixing to help reduce the frequency masking and improve the separation between two or more elements. A common example is to insert a compressor on a bass guitar or other bass element, and then to have the kick drum act as the external sidechain that controls that compressor. That way, when the transient information of the kick drum is present in the mix, it will duck down the bass guitar or other bass element, making that much more room for the kick to poke through without having to alter the overall level of the bass guitar relative to the kick. Another common example could be to use vocals as the external sidechain signal on a compressor acting upon another instrument that has heavy mid-range frequency content. Keyboards, pianos, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, these instruments can all have a lot of mid-range energy that can really compete with the vocal, and to keep that vocal up front, we can use sidechain compression to duck these instruments when the vocal is present, and then have them naturally come up in the mix when the vocal is absent. As I mentioned earlier, subtlety is often the best plan of action when using sidechain for reasons of reducing frequency masking and increasing the separation between elements in a mix. I show off this technique in a few other videos that I think you would enjoy watching. I will leave links to them in the description box down below, along with cards up here. The first video has specifically to do with mixing kick drums and bass elements, and the second video has everything to do with frequency masking in the mix. But in this video, I want to go a bit more aggressive with our sidechain compression and use it more as a production technique, more so than a mixing technique, and focus on its use to breathe a little bit of extra rhythm and groove into our music. For example, there's a common trend in a lot of EDM, electronic dance music, where the kick drum will act as an external sidechain and really pump the rest of the instruments within the mix. As another example, we could breathe a little bit of life and interest into sampled loops by sidechain compressing them with more transient tracks such as the kick or snare. So in this video, we will hop into our digital audio workstation and have a look at this style of sidechain compression. Let's go. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro. We are working with a much more stripped down session than is usual on this YouTube channel, but I just wanted to put something together that's super simple and super easy to grasp when we talk about using sidechain compression for movement and groove in the music we are producing. So let's start off with the more EDM-centric use of sidechain compression in the mix. I have a chord progression right here in Serum. I'll leave a link to Serum in the description box down below if you're interested in checking that out. It's a great synthesizer, wavetable synthesizer. It's the only one I use at this point. And the only other element we have in this section is the kick drum. So I'm going to play them together for you now without any sidechain compression. So very boring, obviously, there's only two elements playing, but I just want to show you what this sidechain compression will sound like when it is turned on. So right here we have the Serum track. We will open up this compressor, turn it on, and we see here that the sidechain is set to audio 2, which is the kick drum right here. So very simple to see where we are sourcing our signals here in the 4-track session that we have going on. So with this, let's have a listen now. You hear that pumping of the Serum patch. You can make it even more aggressive. And the trick here when doing this aggressive style of sidechaining is to allow this compressor to come all the way back to 0 gain reduction. And that is typically achieved by lower thresholds and shorter attack and release times. So let's make a few adjustments here and let's max out at about 10, and then we'll do something interesting here. right, so there we saw that we were maxing out at about negative 10 dB of gain reduction, and then we were just coming back up to 0 gain reduction as the next kick drum came in and slammed that back down to negative 10. Now, if we take this compressor and duplicate it and open both of these up, let's have a listen to this. I'll mute one of these. So we can make it more aggressive and more noticeable with a little bit of serial sidechain compression. It makes quite a difference. And it's much more obvious than trying to use one compressor to get down to negative 20 here. I'll try to do that again. So listen here. And now I'll go over. See, I'm not really ever getting the needle back all the way to 0 there. So there's always some gain reduction going on here. Now if I bring this back down to 10, this one back on. It's a little bit more noticeable. Actually, a lot more noticeable. What if I duplicated this again? And again? So you hear that the more compressors we stack on top of each other, the more obvious we can make this pumping effect. So this doesn't only apply to EDM style like what we are doing here. It can apply to whatever you're doing creatively in your music production endeavors. Now let's move on to something a bit more subtle that was mentioned before we hopped into Logic Pro, and that is to kind of make a percussion loop that may be a bit boring, a little bit more exciting and grooving in the track. So in this section, I just put together something really easy. There's a kick, hat, and snare. Here's the hats. I'll bring this BPM back up. Here's with the kick, and no compression going on. So the hat is a little bit boring there, but then I bring in on the hats, because this is kind of our pseudo loop. We will use a sidechain compressor that is attached to the kick as the external sidechain. Let's turn that on and hear what it sounds like. We'll see the needle dance around here as well. So it just makes that hat drag a little bit behind, even though it's not affecting the timing of the hat. It just gives it that feel. A little boring, a little more movement. Then I have another compressor here that is tied to the snare drum as the external sidechain. Let's bring this one in. With compression, with sidechain compression, and without. Very straight. Now let's bring in the groove. Again, we can drag this a little bit more by, again, duplicating these. Now that's a little bit much on this particular example. But you can hear there that it gives a little bit of subtle groove and movement to that very straightforward sampled loop we have there with the hi-hats. And there's so much more that we can do with sidechain compression, especially when we're dealing with more density in the mix, having more tracks and more relationships between these tracks to really add separation and movement between the elements of the mix. So it's a super useful technique when both producing music and mixing music. These are just a few examples I have here for you to show more obvious examples of how I would go about using sidechain compression in the mix. but I would encourage you to get a little bit more experimental in your mixes and music production sessions with this cool technique. All right, let's hop out of Logic Pro. So I encourage and challenge you to utilize a little bit of sidechain compression in this way to add a little bit of movement and groove into your music production work. If you found this video informative, I would invite you to hit that like button and to also check out my resource called the 54 Must-Know Music Production Techniques. I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below, where I go through 54 of my best music production techniques. It's a nice PDF for you that I put together. So again, there's a link to that in the description box down below. And if you want to hang out with me a little bit more here on YouTube, I would invite you to subscribe to the My New Microphone YouTube channel. We are just getting started here, and I'm excited to have you aboard. I will also leave a few other videos up here in the end screen that I think will be worth checking out for you. So click on one of these, check out your resource down in the description box down below, the 54 Must-Know Music Production Techniques, and I will see you in the next one.